I know I talk about the left a lot, but this week I did an interview, and I'll show you this in a second, an interview which summed up for me so many concerns I do have about what's called, very flatteringly, the progressive movement, the left. Well, my concern has always been it is not progressive, it is regressive. It's going back to the caves, it's turning its back on intellectual freedom, on debate, on truth, even on history. Deep knowledge is gone. You might even say it's turning its back on work. It's the rise of the barbarians. And I know I exaggerate slightly, but here we go. The background to this interview is this past week of violent protest by Marxists and Greens outside a Melbourne mining conference. But, I mean, you could add perhaps even the earlier Extinction Rebellion protests too. This stopping of people from simply meeting and speaking, that totalitarian instinct, well, that's just one thing about these protests. Here is another. I read this in the Herald Sun about one of the arrested demonstrators in court on Thursday. Police said the unemployed Newcastle man, Newcastle, was also arrested outside the convention centre on Tuesday. So here's a man, unemployed, supposedly looking for work, from New South Wales. Yet he still feels free to go to Melbourne for a couple of days and protest. But not just protest against the very industry, mining, that pays the biggest share of taxes, that in turn pays for his dole. Protesting against the people who's paying his dole. I mean, I hope now that this is a dole that he no longer gets. Shouldn't he be at home looking for work? And other demonstrators at this protest seemed equally hostile to anyone who walked past who merely looked like they had a job.
Shame! Shame on you!
Line your hands!
How do you live with yourself, Scott?
And here's another sign of our intellectual decline. Call it the, I don't know, fake news factor, this postmodernist idea that the truth is simply what you say it is, or what you really want to believe it is, or what you really want others to believe it is. So we had here, in this case, a violent demonstration, police getting hurt, some being taken to hospital, and a Greens MP, Adam Band. Well, this is happening right in front of his eyes as he's giving a press conference, yet he then turns around and claims, well, no, the protesters were peaceful.
Well, from what I've seen, I haven't seen myself any of the protesters doing anything other than protesting peacefully.
That Band is a progressive. I'm sure he doesn't mean to lie. I'm sure he's not even conscious that he's not actually telling the untruth. So what's going on? Maybe truth is dead, meaningless now. And here's why I find all this so worrying and threatening, to be honest. When people hate debate, when they hate reason, when facts mean nothing, then all you're left with to sort out our arguments is violence. Violence. Because here's the thing about this protest this week. Most of the organisers of it were actually Marxists from groups like the Socialist Alternative and the Socialist Alliance. One, for instance, is Jerome Small. He's an industrial organiser for the Socialist Alternative, which says proudly that it's a revolutionary Marxist organisation that stands for the overthrow of capitalism and the construction of a world socialist system. And this, it says on its website, means the smashing of the capitalist state apparatus and the dismantling of all those existing state institutions like our parliaments and our courts and our police, etc., etc. Dismantled them all. So really this wasn't an environmental protest, no matter how many journalists said it was a Marxist protest. But the reason that these Marxists are using force is because they can't win on reason. They can't win just by, putting their arguments and calling for a vote of hands. Shall we do this? Shall we do that? Because, have a look at this Jerome Small, for instance. When he stood at the last federal election in one of the most left-wing electorates in the country, Calwell in Melbourne, He got less than 5% of the vote, even there. Or check out another one of the organisers, Jacob Andrew Arthur. He's on the National Executive of the Socialist Alliance. When he stood in the last Victorian state election in Bundoora, he did even worse. Came dead last, just 2.29% of the vote. And there's now he and his mates in the streets, throwing their weight around, trying to stop citizens from simply having a meeting or going to work. Now, of course, these people are few and in many ways rather pathetic. But have you checked how many posters are put up around our universities advertising Marxist causes? Posters clearly put up by badly educated students who seem insanely ignorant of the bloody history of communism. There may actually soon be more barbarians in our midst than you may have thought.